nice, easy question that you should all be able to answer. Can you give us a 30-second guide to your background and how you ended up in aviation? Gwen, would you like to go first?
Good morning, everyone. I am Gwen Leiter. I am the founder and CEO of GoFly. GoFly is a multi-million-dollar international incentive competition and incubator and accelerator where we have invited the world's innovators to create personal flying devices. And when we speak about personal flying devices, we are speaking about the stuff of your dreams. We have over 3,000 innovators from 97 countries participating right now. They are making jetpacks and flying motorcycles and flying cars and hoverboards and all of this transformative technology. We are supported by Boeing and Pratt & Whitney and 20 different aerospace organizations around the world, including AIAA, the Royal Aeronautical Society, 3AF in France, the Singapore Space and Technology Association. And what we have created is an enormous ecosystem where some of the world's best innovators are creating transformative technology to make people fly. And we have the deities of aerospace serving as masters and mentors, one of whom is actually on this panel with us, to all of the teams from around the world. Everything culminates in a final fly-off that will take place next year.
Dean?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dean Roberts. I work for Rolls-Royce, the aircraft engine company, just to make sure, not the car company, because I met several of you last night who thought I was from the car company. My background is 35 years in the aircraft engine business. I look after business aviation market forecasting. I produce a 20-year market forecast. I also advise our management on developments in business aviation, and that's why I'm here, is to try and learn. The other thing I do is actually I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Virginia, where I teach a course on entry barriers into the civil aerospace industry. And I recently published a book on the subject as well. This is really my territory, so I'm really looking forward to this conference.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm James Wang, and I always loved aviation. I started playing those radio control model airplane helicopters since I was a little kid. And after that, I was hooked. I decided I have to go to aviation, design my real airplane, my own helicopters. I joined, after I get my PhD degree, I joined Sikorsky Aircraft. So actually, I worked there for 18 years. I helped work on the design of the Black Hawk, the Comanche, the presidential helicopter, the S-92, the 76. It was great fun. And I had an opportunity to go to work in Europe. And then I joined Leonardo, or back then it was called Augusta Western Helicopter in Italy. So lived in Italy, had lots of pasta and everything. It was fantastic, 10-year life. And then while I was in Italy at Augusta, I was the senior vice president of R&D. That's when I designed and developed the Augusta Western Project Zero. That was 2010. That was the world's first eVTOL aircraft, actually, that 210. And then I realized that is the future. Why? Because I studied electrical engineering and aerospace engineering. I think there must be a way to combine them. So I thought electric would be the future. And then working in big company for 25 years, decided finally time to go, open my own consulting company. So that's what I do now. I consult to all the, like you said, 100 eVTOL companies around the world. That's what I do to help them. And I'm glad. This is, eVTOL is the future, okay?
Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Paddock. I'm responsible for the U.S. regional operations for Jet Aviation. We're a traditional business aircraft support services provider, much like Patrick. You know, we do FBO, MRO, aircraft management charter completions of business jets ranging from CJ-1s and PC-12s up to BBJs and larger. You know, when like a lot of people in this room probably, when you were in high school, you didn't really know what you wanted to do, so I went to college and I tried to figure it out. I got a degree in environmental science. I did that for about 3 years, and then my father-in-law, who was in the Royal Air Force at the time, said, hey, environmental is boring. aviation is cool. You should go and switch from environmental to aviation. And I, being a young kid, I said, hey, I think you're right. I respect you. I'll do that. So I did. So in 1993, I switched careers and have never looked back. I love aviation, love getting up every morning. It's always a challenge. It's always an opportunity. And this particular topic, Al, thanks for inviting us, is fantastic. This is the future of our industry.
I think it's just nice that someone listens to their father-in-law.
Not the mother-in-law.
You know this is being videoed. Patrick.
Well, thank you very much for being here. I like when he says that he's a traditional business aviation support company. I don't like it when he says just like us, because we think we are innovative, not traditional. But, we started 10 years ago when we owned a jet, and we noticed at that moment three things. First of all, with one jet, you cannot make money, and so you can also make money with owning 100 jets. Second, this business was extremely fragmented. And third, most of these operators, they had very few jets on their, what is in Europe called AOCs. So basically then 10 years ago we went out and bought a lot of operators around the world, also with maintenance, with MROs, as well as with Aviation, and today we are everywhere except for the Americas. I'm rather excited to be here because over the last years we acquired helicopter companies, and that's basically for us, we said the eVTOL space is somewhere we have to go into, and we launched an initiative to support eVTOL companies with regulatory technology.
So sticking with I won't call you a traditional company, because it obviously annoys you, but do you not see this as a threat to your traditional business aviation market?
Oh, I think it is a threat to the whole business aviation market, and that's why I believe it's good not to be traditional, but to see what's coming and position yourself in it. I had to.
Dave, one of the things that you deal with a lot is regulation. Do you think people within aviation always go, this is a different industry, it's unique. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think regulation has the opportunity to either support or suppress some of the technological innovation in this space. I mean, I look at what has happened in the light sport side of the general aviation marketplace. There's been some good examples we could point to say that has supported the development. But in other cases like high speed, supersonic, the regulatory environment hasn't kept pace with what we think to be the market demand. So regulation is important. I think what's going on from an EASA perspective, Patrick's very familiar with EASA. In the US, we're more familiar with FAA. Both EASA and FAA have shown signs to support developing technology into this type of space.
As someone involved in managing a large fleet, are you finding the regulatory burden is getting tougher for you every year, though, from a US or a European perspective?
Well, if I may, we have, not just in Europe, but also Africa, Australia, and Middle East. Altogether, we have approximately 600 certifications that we have to maintain. That's a huge burden. And I don't have the impression it's becoming easier. To the contrary. That's why we have spent a lot of time in the past years in order to find ways to optimize that.
James, when you were at Sikorsky or Augusta, did you see Leonardo, you were constantly battling against regulation. That was one of or not battling, but working with regulators. Do you see that as the biggest barrier for the startups you're advising now?
Regarding regulation, yes. I would say because I have designed the electric eVTOL, the Project Zero before, so that technology-wise, the design one is relative simple. And the number quoted before, 28 billion, I don't think you need that much. At most 1 billion. It's more than enough to design 2 or 3 eVTOL. But while I was at Augusta West and Sikorsky, yes, regulation was the biggest thing. We're constantly working with EASA, FAA, every time they come up with new design. I noticed some of the smaller companies I've been consulting, working with, the biggest lacking in knowledge is they don't understand how the FAA, the EASA, CAA, the regulatory work. Because most of these startups, they are coming from the Silicon Valley or the semiconductor, electronic, tech industry. They're not familiar with the aerospace, the regulation, the 10 to the minus 9, the safety issue required by the civil regulators.
Gwen, is this something that when people come to you and they enter the GoFly project, are they underestimating it, or does it not matter at that stage?
Regulation is incredibly important, and there's a dichotomy between what the technology can do now and the regulations now, and what it will be able to do in 5 to 10 years and the regulatory environment there. At GoFly, we are incredibly in incredibly close contact with the FAA. There is a person designated at the FAA to answer all GoFly team and innovator questions. And actually, this Friday, we have Earl Lawrence, who is head of UAV integration in the FAA's airspace, giving a master lecture to all of our innovators. So what we have done on the GoFly side to help our thousands of innovators from around the world is that we have cultivated a very good relationship with the FAA to allow our teams to navigate that regulation. So too, I think that everyone needs to realize that the FAA wants to encourage innovation and certainly does not want its U.S. companies to fall behind because other regulatory environments are easier to get through. And so what you're seeing at the FAA now is a dichotomy between protecting the safety of those on the ground and protecting the passengers, at the same time as they are realizing that there truly is a convergence of different types of transformative technology, which make this a golden moment of aviation, and they do not want to lose the advantage.
I'm slightly more cynical, and I think that the FAA, I think, do want to do that, and I think EASA and the UK CAA and the other regulators I talk to are all keen to encourage it, but fundamentally, I think the DNA of those regulators is to be slow, be conservative, and you can see why with a plane flying over your head. Does anyone else see a real sea change going on? James, do you think it's easier now than it was 5 years ago?
No, I don't think it's any easier, but at least because I wouldn't want anything to fly constantly over my house every day, back and forth, left and right, crisscross, regarding at what altitude. But the reason I say it's not easier, but because it's a challenge to regulate so many vehicles. However, one advantage that FAA has recognized eVTOL is the future. So they are actually working with these like GoFly, smaller companies, startup, trying to help and examine whether there's a solution. So at least they recognize.
I was thinking regulators' futures 10 years after everyone else's. You said 1 billion to certify an eVTOL was your theory.
Much less than that. What's the record come out? To design a brand new helicopter, like S-92 or something, that's quite sophisticated. 19 passenger costs you 1.5 billion. To design a new helicopter like the AW169, less than 1 billion. So typical mark to design a brand new helicopter under $1 billion. However, it takes 8 to 10 years to design one of those. But 28 billion, I don't think that's a far off number. Most of the number we use where? Regulation, operation, infrastructure, logistics, trying to get the system working. That's where the majority of money for eVTOL will be spent.
Dean, in your book, which I have read, your book is basically about how to challenge in the commercial aircraft market and how hard it is for someone to break into the big moats that OEMs have. What do you see this as an area where there's room for startups and new entrants?
I think so, but I think one of the real issues about regulation is actually the consequences of failure are pretty profound, and that's why there's a huge, overhead that we have as an industry, It's not like producing sort of iPhones and things like that, where the consequence of failure is not particularly strong, where a piece of technology that's flying in the air, if it fails, it has big consequences. So there is a quite a legitimate public interest in almost slowing innovation to make sure it's well tested. And it is indeed a really quite really large entry barrier. The times I've seen through my life, lots of companies coming along with really what they think is really excellent technology, but then they stub their toe on the regulatory point of view. And also there's also the whole issue of government engagement of other issues like subsidies, like support for research and development, that also is very different from other marketplaces. Having said all that, that's very prevalent at aircraft, say, 100 seats and above. I think a lot of people in the gathering here are actually in the smaller, much smaller aircraft market space, and government intervention for jobs creation and defense proprietary reasons is not so prevalent. So I think entry barriers are somewhat different for smaller aircraft than big aircraft.
Does everyone on the panel, and I think one of the questions from the session before is there actually a market for startups? Or is this industry going to be dominated by incumbents? Dean?
I think
as an incumbent, you can only answer one way. I'm clearly an incumbent. We've been around 118 years, so we know how to compete. And many of our competitors and our customers have been around a long, long time. So incumbency is a real strong position to be in. You've got a lot of sunk costs. You've got a lot of research and development on the shelf already. So that's something I would suggest to startups is don't be sort of too derisory about the incumbents, because they've lasted a long time. And to put it blunt, they're not stupid. That's a typical incumbent comment. That's what the black cab taxi companies said. Gwen. Gwen, what do you think?
I actually think that the incumbents will help to pave the way. Because we're dealing not only with rapid changes in technology, but also the need for regulation, the bigger players are incredibly supportive and are aware of what is going on. If you look at who our sponsors are, we have Boeing and Pratt & Whitney and many other companies. So the major players know what's going on. You have Boeing buying Aurora, and you have Horizon X making many different investments. You have Airbus starting A3. So this will be an ecosystem that allows for many players. Make no mistake about this, the traditional aerospace market will remain, but we will see a sea change in a new area. And just like in the automotive industry, how you can walk into a car dealership now and you can buy a pickup truck, or if it's a beautiful day outside and you want a convertible, you can do that. And if you've got lots of kids and dogs and soccer stuff, you've got a minivan, and you've got all different options. So too in the aerospace industry, we are now seeing a burgeoning of different types of flying devices being offered. It is not that the old industry will die, not at all. Those incumbents will stay. They have a 118-year history and longer, and they are doing a phenomenal job. It is that new players and new people and new innovations will come and create a whole new part of an existing market.
Okay. Really interesting question from the audience. Going back to regulation, which I think I may have just deleted by accident. Can a company take a Bird scooter, the Bird scooter was the electric scooter, creating an incredibly useful product that people love, and worry about regulation later? David, as someone who deals with the FAA, would you advise this strategy?
Well, I think it's interesting. I know technologists, have a term called fail fast. I don't think that's typical to aviation and the regulatory authorities. I think it's a laid out, laborious process to prove a technology before it's ever introduced to the marketplace. But if you take that fail fast mindset and deploy it, you could develop technology that keeps pace with market entry, especially on the small side. I mean, on either the 1 pound, the 50 pound, the 2 passenger, 4 passenger types of vehicles, and then move up. Because as you move up the passenger count per airplane, risk increases, everything increases. So that's where the regulators will really spend most of their time focusing on. When you're moving a lot of people over longer distances, the risk is exponentially greater. If you're moving small groups of people over very short distances or no people, the risk is either de minimis or not relevant relative to the larger ones.
But you wouldn't advise, these are federal regulators. You wouldn't advise someone to not worry about regulation, which I think this question is.
Not worry about regulation, but consider regulation. To the prior statement about Earl Lawrence, the FAA has taken this directly, and they see that there's opportunity in this space. They're very receptive to working with people. I sit on the board of the General Aviation Manufacturers Association. We've had people from trade industry, from the regulatory community, from startups like this, who have had very good experience in the last 1 to 2 years with the FAA's approach. So I'm not saying that they will support it across the board, but they will support and have shown that they're willing to support innovation.
Patrick, one question that's come up is there's a general consensus in the industry that there's a shortage of staff. Do you think there's enough people in aviation to adapt, or is the future autonomous because there isn't enough people?
I think there's two questions in that. I think right now we have a shortage of staff, but I think I concur with Paul that for a long time all these eVTOLs will still be flown by trained pilots, be that in the eVTOL or on the ground. And I think that's where people like David at Jet Aviation or us at Luxaviation, where we, I think, have a role to fill, because I think there's a lot of technology know-how here in the Valley or other places to build these incredible machines, and they're flying. But I think at the end of the day, if you are an FAA or if you're a civil aviation authority anywhere in the world, you definitely would like to rely on somebody like us who are known to operate safely big fleets around the world, small and big jets. I think that's where we have a role to play. And yes, indeed, from the pilot's point of view, it's a new group of people that need to be trained and certified, and that's also where people like us, I think, are a reliable partner to the civil aviation authorities as well as to the tech companies.
One question, which for you guys, is that historically aviation has been a terrible generator of wealth. Airlines have lost money. The margins in your industry are pretty low. You're always complaining about them. Anyway, many OEMs have failed to make money long term. We've seen that, the commercial market's a duopoly, even more than it was, a few years ago. Will anything change?
I would say this: if you're manufacturing product and servicing product, you will make money. If you're owning those assets, unless you're in the financial side of the transaction, an aircraft leasing company, for example, it will be very challenging. And because that has fundamentally been what the challenge has been within the airlines. If you had an airline owning all their equipment versus leasing all their equipment, that could either be an unprofitable or a profitable enterprise.
Jay?
Let me speak from the manufacturer side. Usually, like I explained before, it takes usually about $1 billion to come with a new helicopter. And if you are thinking of open a company to invest on making eVTOL or something, give you an example. Traditional helicopter company takes at least 10 years to recover the $1 billion spent, right? Because you only sell about 500 to 1,000. You can calculate 10% return on the profit, how long it will take. For eVTOL, I think most of the investing company are smaller startup and the expense is lower. It won't cost them $1 billion. And the quantity they sell will be much higher than, we're not talking hundreds of units. We'll be talking thousands, more than 10,000 units. So I expect the return on their investment should be better. Not as much 10 years, it'll be less, but still going to take a few years to recover.
Hey, Alasdair, can I say something about the other end of the market on regulation? I mean, there's some really fantastic developments on supersonics in Congress at the moment. It seems that there is a sort of vehicle for examining the feasibility of flying civil supersonics above land. And that might worry a lot of people, but the whole ethos is that the current regulation of a complete ban stops innovation. It means that nobody wants to, not many people want to put money up because there's a blanket ban. But if you can create a regulation that says the noise level at ground level is very, very low or minuscule, and it has to be a certain number, then that enables innovators and entrepreneurs to actually think about potentially bringing solutions to market. And there are many. There are at least 3 companies out there that are looking at this in a very significant sense. But I just wanted to bring in that this is another aspect of the FAA sort of doing 2 things. One is being a bit hard on regulations, but also there's the notion over the next few years of actually them being quite supportive in releasing or looking at new regulations for supersonics at the other end of the market.
It's a nice audience question. Should we be trying to change the dynamic to self-certification? Asking the FAA to govern the blossom of technology, that's a lovely phrase, seems to be a bottleneck, not an enabler. Any comments?
Yes.
Okay, that was a good answer.
No, I can elaborate. So, I mean, I mentioned it before, light sport aircraft. One of my colleagues is a friend who is president of a company called Cub Crafters. They have light sport aircraft. They also have certified product. And on the light sport side, you can have aircraft owners do maintenance on their own airplane. They're classified as experimental. And then on the certified side, they have traditional certified airplanes. So the regulatory framework doesn't fully exist today, but it is. I'm not sure about the self-certification, but you can certify and maintain at a level that is lower than traditional aircraft.
Any other comments?
I would say no to complete self-certification because anything flying is quite a complex vehicle. To be completely leave it to the responsibility of the individual company who design the product to certify themselves that yes, my product is safe and we can fly, I think that's very risky.
David Hernandez, Better Price.
Yeah, question, or not question, maybe a comment. And so,
And it's questions, we're not doing comments.
All right, questions then. So, I guess it's a question. So what really struck me was that bird scooter comment. And just 2 weeks ago, in D.C., someone was struck and killed by a sport utility riding a bird scooter. So the issue is going to be, at least if you use that same analogy, right, that when these streets starts filling up with these bird scooters, cities are going to start banning them. When you start seeing 10, 15 people die a week getting hit by cars, people are doing stupid stuff all over. So my comment is, and then a question, is, so the FAA is a regulatory agency. I used to work at the FAA. I've challenged the FAA and DOT twice in U.S. District Court and Supreme Court of Appeals and won when I thought they were exceeding their authority under the Administrative Procedure Act. So the question is, and I think it's great, and the last question speaks to it, is Sure, we want to have the FAA be an incubator-like place where we foster new technology, but you're never going to get away from the FAA's primary role is safety. And so to suggest that, we're going to break glass and go through and just bust up the FAA is not going to happen. I think it's more realistic what Gwen's doing is working with the FAA. And so do you have any examples of how you've worked with the FAA or suggest working with the FAA to have them understand what the technology is? Because these folks don't get it when it comes to what this next technology is. And frankly, I would suspect most of them don't care because their job is safety. They want to save lives, and the stuff that you guys, or at least we're talking about in this conference, terrifies them. Because it's a job ender for them if they approve some new technology and it crashes. So, thank you.
Any comments?
A quick comment. I think the FAA, they do realize already. I think what my recommendation to FAA is they need to bone up, increase their number of members, the people, start working with these startups. And I think they realize that. I think they are doing that because for a Boeing, Airbus, helicopter company, FAA typically has people dedicated to sign working full-time with them. Right now, they don't have enough people to dedicate to work with these 100 startups. And they need more people.
Any more traditional questions in the audience? Yes, we've got microphone's just coming to. It's just coming to. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Joe Ben from Joby Aviation. I just wanted to say that we're actively working with the FAA every day. They're absolutely fantastic. They're leaning into this very aggressively, and I think their interests are very much aligned with this industry's interests, which is safety. I think we need to celebrate the incredible safety record of the FAA and of aviation. Over the last 120 years, we've made aviation the safest mode of transport in the world. Today, it's about 20,000 times safer per mile traveled than driving in a car. Just to say that again, it's 20,000 times safer per mile traveled than driving in a car. And so we need to celebrate that. Small airplanes are not as safe, but when you put a professional pilot in them and you fly them as Part 135 aircraft, they become significantly safer than driving. And then if you fly them as Part 121 commercial air transport, it's spectacularly safe. And so I just think we all need to be praising the incredible work that the industry and the FAA have done in improving safety. And I'd like to echo James' comment that the FAA will need to staff up in order to be able to handle the workload of this incredible number of new projects that are coming online. And also that this is an expensive undertaking. So, but I think it's an incredible opportunity, and like to echo the notion that we're standing at the dawn of an incredible new era in mobility and in civilization. So, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, we've got so many questions. Unless you want to pick one, James, his thoughts on manufacturing plans for 20,000 vehicles a year. There are still planes, not cars. No aircraft OEM produces more than, can really get over 1,000 aircraft a year. Is this just a completely new way of looking at things?
So the question, let me repeat the question. The question is that it's like 1,000 quantity.
It's
Which
just
one?
coming out there.
Thoughts on manufacturing plan for 20,000 plus vehicles per year. They're still planned airplane, not car. First, let me talk a little bit about OEM and also the brick and mortar versus the new company. I think right now it's very good. It's very American to have wonderful 100 startup company all working from this. The advantage of the small company is they have that can-do attitude, especially Silicon Valley. That's why it's so good. And right now, the major 5 helicopter company, OEM, Sikorsky, Boeing, Bell, Airbus, Leonardo, they're still like the sleeping giants. They're still sitting there watching, yes. Now, recently, Airbus has started looking at them. Augusta Western started the electric a few years ago. But I think later on, a few years later, I think the big company, eventually, they will either buy up whoever the most successful out of those 100 startups and start eating them up. And or they also start doing themselves now. To manufacture 20,000, it's doable. Give you some facts again. Typical helicopter company like Sikorsky or Augusta, we manufacture about 200 to 400 helicopters a year. That is it, only 200 to 400. 20,000 is a big jump, but we're talking much smaller, easier. Like mentioned before, 4 moving parts, 4 electric motor, propeller. So it's much easier to do 20,000 parts, mass production, thermoplastic, easily doable by a big company.
So you're basically saying the old OEMs were fundamentally lazy.
Or for the startup, they need to work together with lots of partners, form their own conglomerate, build up. Then they can do it also. 20,000, it can be done.
Okay. Any more questions or comments? Yeah, we've got one from the front.
I just wanted to see if any of you could follow up on the advantages of a startup, because you mentioned a little bit, but is there anything else you guys feel that startups can do that maybe kind of the large giants can't at the moment?
So the question, let me repeat. Is there anything the smaller startup can do what the giants cannot do? Is that right? Yes. The giant, one key advantage that they have, that can-do attitude, and they're very flexible, very quick. For example, when I was working at a big company, to get any money procurement to spend, it takes 10 signatures. Things are just too slow, too much process, too much red tape. But the advantage of the big company, they have a lot of background in making safe flying vehicle, and they have experience working with the FAA. So that is where the strength is.
Gwen or Paddock?
I would say the same thing. Even us, we are not the size of a Rolls-Royce or Boeing, but even us in our group, we had to separate this new division in order just to be quick and then take advantage of the resources that we have in the remainder of the company support. That's been, I think, that is basically what the new startup can bring, is speed and innovation.
Yeah, let me just chime in on that, if you don't mind. As one of the huge incumbents here, the way we manage innovation, we have incremental innovation, which is the most of Boeing's, most of Apple's innovation is incremental. And that's about 80 or 90% of innovation in the world is incremental. And we have our own division, which is, we have a radical innovation division. We have a facility in our Indianapolis facility, for instance, that does that. Another part of radical innovation is we partner with universities, and we partner with companies like yourselves. So we address innovation holistically, right from pedestrian, slow, incremental stuff to quite radical stuff. So we have the whole process of innovation is managed. It sounds contradictory, but that's how we approach it. And most other aerospace companies, big aerospace companies, do the same.
Gwen.
So one must always remember that large established companies have budgets in place for a very long time and need to always be focused on accruing value for their shareholders. And so the types of technology that we have been speaking about during this panel is something that is a phenomenal opportunity, but it is separate from bread and butter businesses. And so what you do see is a number of these larger companies segmenting their innovation, having different units focusing on this. And an advantage of being a startup is clearly, faster decision-making time. You don't have the budgets that are out, years in advance. And so one can be more nimble in a startup. But I do not think that we should ever lose sight of the fact that what these larger companies do incredibly well is their safety record. And so as startups are truly inventing transformative technology, I do not think that they should ever lose sight of the practices and procedures of the larger companies who focus day in and day out on safety. And for our vision, and everybody has different visions, but for the collective vision of seeing this type of eVTOL and different types of new technology, they must be safe. And so there's a combination of nimbleness in startups, budgetary planning, and safety planning in larger companies that to have a thriving ecosystem later on, every company will need to utilize.
Okay, final question, because time's up. In The Graduate, there's that great scene where he's by the pool and everyone keeps giving him a single word. So plastics or, oil. What's the one word that you think everyone should be concentrating on for the next 5 years in aviation? Patrick?
Safety.
Okay, it's got to be a different word from now on.
Sorry, guys.
Battery technology.
Batteries. You can't have 2 words, batteries.
Technology.
Technology is also an opt-out. You're not having that. James?
Energy density.
Okay, energy. 1 word, guys. Let's get this working.
We're learning.
Dean?
Well, I'd agree with my people
One
here.
word.
Sorry,
Yep.
batteries.
Gwen?
Innovation.
Okay, and that's also a cop-out. But anyway, thank you very much.
I own that. It is a cop-out.